Yes, Ann Wilcox from the Lawyers Guild here in D.C. I just wanted to ask about a couple perhaps special cases, and one is going to be in the news in the next few weeks, the Gaza flotilla that'll be going to Gaza. The second one, it includes a U.S. boat, the Audacity of Hope, as many have heard, which is sponsored by a coalition of groups. And I'm also thinking of the Friend Shipment Pastors for Peace caravan that goes to Cuba every year, and I just wonder if either of those, are they special cases or are they implicated in the context of the discussion?
Hi, thanks to all the panelists for sharing all your expertise. My name is Shannon with the Rights Working Group. And I just had two questions kind of about the domestic implications of this law. The first one, we work on racial profiling by law enforcement, and I was wondering kind of if there's possibilities for racial profiling or religious kind of disparities in terms of who's charged and who's prosecuted for material support charges, especially individuals who I guess would be more vulnerable. And my second question is related to kind of these anti-Sharia laws that have come up in different states. I know in Tennessee earlier this year they introduced a law that included similar material support provisions to this case. And clearly in that situation it was used kind of as a political tool to target the Muslim community in Tennessee. And I was wondering what the panelists think in terms of whether there's a threat that these types of provisions could be used for kind of political manipulation, and if there are other kind of domestic implications within the country in terms of targeting specific groups in the name of national security.
Thanks very much. So let me present Ann's question to Emily first. I mean, what's your sense of things like these flotillas that are entering Gaza, multiple organizations, multiple nationalities involved? Maybe this would be a good chance to also say a word about the extraterritorial applicability of the material support statute. Is it your sense that the material support law could be invoked in relation to these ships that are on their way?
Absolutely. In 2002, in the Patriot Act, Congress expanded the application of the material support statute extraterritorially. So I think, that seems to me to be solidly within the definition of, providing property or services or what have you to, if they go to the groups that are on the list. Yeah?
Yeah.
I used to live in Gaza. I visit there every couple of months. Hamas is the government of Gaza. So if by some chance this boat actually makes it into the Gaza City harbor, they're going to be received by that government. Presumably, employees of that government might unload the cargo. I mean, hell, in that respect, every time I enter the Gaza Strip, I cross through a Hamas-run checkpoint just south of the Israeli checkpoint. Does that mean that I'm coordinating with an FTO every time I travel to Gaza City? I don't know, but certainly, virtually every U.S. NGO working in Gaza has to bend over backwards to try to not have any contact whatsoever, if they're on U.S. government funds, particularly with the government of the territory where they're trying to work. And presumably that would apply to the flotilla as well if they manage to arrive.
Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, I mean, leaving aside extraterritoriality for a second, I mean, any U.S. citizen involved in the flotilla, if that person doesn't have express written consent from either the Treasury or the Commerce Department, depending on whether it's money or whether it's goods that are being sent, without that express written consent, they're in violation of the embargo that's being imposed on Hamas, and therefore subject to prosecution. It would be similar for Cuba, but I'm pretty sure the Cuba work now is actually licensed. I don't think they're doing that as a civil disobedience act, but I can almost guarantee you that they get a license for it before they do it. And that's the whole, I mean, outside of the war on terror, which I know is getting more expansive by the minute, but outside of the war on terror, I mean, it's actually possible to get a license, to get permission to either travel to Cuba or send aid to Cuba or whatever, and I assume in the Cuba case they do that.
Kate, could I ask you to address also Shannon's question? We've spent a lot of time talking about large powerful organizations, civil society organizations. Could you speak to this question of racial profiling and the effect on Muslim charities and smaller organizations within the U.S.?
Certainly, in the U.S., there have been 9 U.S.-based charities that have been shut down by the Treasury Department, had their assets frozen. This is done under the same embargo law that imposes sanctions on countries like North Korea or Iran, and so there's essentially no effective appeal and no deadline for when that money might ever get released. All 9 organizations are Muslim or South Asian. 7 of them are basically Muslim faith-based organizations or serving people in Muslim-dominant regions or countries, and 2 were Tamil organizations that were getting aid to Sri Lanka. So that there are several ways and all layers where the profiling or the disproportionate impact, I would say, has hit. It has hit on the donors who, for these large Muslim charities that were shut down right after 9/11, Global Relief, Benevolence International, and the Holy Land Foundation, received a lot of zakat, religious donations that were made during the month of Ramadan, and to have that basically seized by the government and held indefinitely is a serious infringement on their right of religious expression. For the operating charities, of course, they're shut down. They're not able to continue to deliver their programs. But the worst impact really is on the beneficiary side, and this is where the effect is discriminatory, whether it's intended or not. And outside the U.S., there's a strong feeling that it is intended, but that most of the programs, whether it's charities like Save the Children or like Islamic Relief USA, they're serving in Muslim-majority countries or regions, have a lot of extra restrictions on who they can work with or how they can do their work, and in some cases where they're unable to work. I've heard stories from 2 large charities about how in Somalia they were told by the U.S. government they couldn't drill a well in a village because someone from Al-Shabaab might come through and get a drink of water. So the whole village goes without the access to water. I think in getting back to a point that was made both with the flotilla and about the examples, what the policy forgets, and the concept under international humanitarian law, is that civilians are entitled to aid and protection. We've turned that upside down. Now civilians aren't entitled to anything. They're suspected of being terrorists, and they can only get aid if the government grants a license. And that needs to be flipped back over and respect that presumption of civilian status and honoring of the rights of non-combatants.
Thanks very much, Kay. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time, so I'll just close first by asking you to join me in thanking our panelists for their contributions. For your questions, and particularly the Charity and Security Network. I would really strongly recommend their website as a resource for materials on this issue. And I think just in closing, I think 1 year after this troubling, I think is a kind word, decision, I think that we've heard from our panelists that the U.S. has a long and proud tradition of contributing to peace-building, democratization, and life-saving humanitarian activities around the world by professional and long-standing organizations that understand perhaps better than most the threats of rebel groups, terrorists, and insurgents to civilian lives and to U.S. national security interests. And I think it's discussions like these that will expand the knowledge and awareness among Americans in the U.S. about this law, these regulations, and their potential implications on that history of charitable and peace-building activity on the part of the U.S. and many organizations based here. So thanks again, Kay, and your hard work on this. Thank you.